thing. It's okay, let me frame this decision I'm about to make, by recognizing the potential risk reward, the benefit ratio, and will I accept that? So if I do something dumb and I pay a price, I knew I was going to pay a price and I chose to take that risk. I mean, that would be a healthier thing than, oh, you might not want to risk that because it might not work out. Well, what does not working out mean? I mean, I ran the race and I didn't win and I feel bad because I didn't win or I got mocked because of it. Is that a price that you're unwilling to pay? Maybe it is, but maybe it's not that big a deal. But again, we don't think that through in advance. We don't really teach kids to think that through in advance, to live with the consequence of the risk or to choose not to take the risk because they don't want to live with that consequence. Let them think that through a little bit. But again, that's hard to do when the part of your brain that actually processes that doesn't develop until you're in your 20s. So, it's an interesting conundrum I've danced with for a lot of years, especially with teenagers.
Jen, would you go next, please?
I was going to say that the idea that, we kind of, I want to say, curb the enthusiasm. I want to like to say that, curb the enthusiasm of, let's say, teens or kids to do something. It's always very interesting to me that the people I meet always, a lot of times get there anyway, me included. Um, Obviously not, and usually because they were kind of maybe discouraged on that aspect, it's never the direct way. It's usually they came by it via like, doing 20 other things, and that's where they end up anyway. And so some of that, when I look at kids and I think about kids, is how much of it is it like really them? Like
Yeah,
when you're
yeah.
making that decision to say something to a child or to a teenager, like how much of it are you really looking at who they really are when you make that recommendation? And you know as especially if you're a parent and you're around those kids all the time, you really, I mean, I think most they know their kids and they know what their qualities are and what their loves are, let's say. And and what fears do you have, or what's going on in your life that makes you color it for them almost?
Hmm. Yeah, who are you making
100%.
the recommendation for? Is it for the parent or is it actually for the kid?
Almost
Yeah, that's a
never
really
for
good
the
point.
kid.
Yeah,
Almost never for the kid. It's usually the speaker speaking their own life.
yeah, yeah.
It's like when I started my business, I went around and told people I'm going to work for myself. Well, how are you going to handle insurance? How are you going to handle your retirement? How are you going to do this? How are you going to do? Boy, that's really hard. 1 in 10 companies make it, and the rest of them die, and you're gonna die. So. But I think the whole notion of interacting this way with children, it's a natural thing for adults to try to protect people that they love from
Mhm.
unseen things that they can't even predict. I can't protect you from this choice because this is far beyond my reach. I can't do anything about this, and I really hope that you're successful, but I don't think you will be because most people are not. And then when it all comes back down to it, the whole idea of the asking the question in advance is so powerful. Can you live with the outcome either way? Do you realize the power in making that choice ahead of time? If you didn't make that choice
Mhm.
and you did something and it didn't work out, how long are you walking around questioning your decision to do what you did, as opposed to, I knew this was one of the possibilities in advance. I said I was going to go ahead and do it. Next,
Yeah,
you know?
And also the regret if you don't do something. Like to me, that's
exactly.
a
Yeah,
huge thing, is the kind of thing of like the fact that you don't make the decision, you don't have that, or you're not you don't ask those questions.
Yeah.
And then you go through the what if scenario,
hmm,
like for years and years, like what if I had made that choice? And I think when you ask the questions ahead of time, you kind of say, like, you're coming to a different place. So you kind of say, okay, well, I made the choice and this was why. And not to say that it necessarily, but it's a little different than not having that awareness to begin with. And then you always have the what if scenario.
Yeah, and it's interesting how, like, we're listening to a podcast. I can't remember who it was. Might have been Tim Ferriss, but they were talking about the qualities of entrepreneurs, and one of them is a high tolerance for risk.
Yes.
And and I heard that, and it was kind of an interesting thing, because looking even with adults, but with kids specifically, some of them do not have a high tolerance for risk. So you ask them the questions and they're like, no, 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 I don't want to risk it. And then there's the part of you, like, I have a high tolerance for risk. I'm an entrepreneur. So I'm like, well, why wouldn't you? And then you find yourself like projecting your tolerance levels onto them. And now we're back to that influencing thing. And it's so like subtle and kind of insidious, because you got to remember, they're not you, they're different. And and if they have a lower tolerance for risk, then they may just not want, they may rather have the regret, or maybe they end up with less regret, because what they would regret is the failure. So I don't know, but it's such a fascinating thing, because there's a lot of different dimensions to it. And now you're back to mindfulness and self-awareness. I mean, if a kid said, you know what, I have a low tolerance for risk, I don't like taking risks. Okay, I can respect that you know that about yourself. And and if you understand the upsides and the downsides, and you can live with the downsides of that approach to life, who's to say that's wrong?
Well, here's the really cool thing about that. I'm going to say right now, it's all a freaking conversation, guys. How did you come to that decision that you are a low risk person? Give me a freaking break around here. We make decisions about ourselves like we know something, and then we forget we made that decision, and that's just who we are from now on, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to introduce myself. I am a low risk tolerant person. I hope you'll interact appropriately with me, and when you don't, I will smack the crap out of you. Okay.
Well, and again, isn't that an interesting thing? Because that, again, there wouldn't be saying it out loud, but recognize, and maybe it's you just started a family. Your first child was just born.
Yes.
I guarantee your tolerance for risk is going to be a lot lower at that phase of your life than it's going to be when your kids are grown and you don't have as much that you need to worry about. So.
Yeah, sorry, Ken. But I think it also depends not only where you are, but to realize that there might be certain aspects of your life that you are a risk taker. And other risks where you're not. It's kind of like the idea of, I always think of, the mindfulness I've done in the meditation of like, okay, the difference between saying I'm afraid, or as opposed to I am with the feeling of fear, where it's not all who you are. It's like, that's just one single little part of myself. And when I think about this, it might be in one area of my life, I'm a huge risk taker. And in another area of my life, I tend to be somewhat reserved and I'm not a risk taker. Yeah. So maybe there is that differentiating point too.
That's actually a really interesting one, especially when you start thinking in the circle of relationships. Like, are you a personal risk taker? But then when it comes to people around you, do you not want to engage in risk that could, endanger them in some way? But then if it's just you and no one else is gonna, so that's like that could be a fun, just experiment, almost like a thought experiment for people. Where's my threshold, and how does that change dynamically depending on where I am and the circumstances around it.
Exactly. The other really cool part of that is that nobody ever has this thought about themselves.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's the cool thing.
It's brought up.
Having I almost like just visualize like the spider chart, like when they're looking at
And that's what our lives really look like, right? There's no
no. What a cool kind of. Yeah, that'd be really interesting. I'm going to do it for myself now. I'm curious.
Well, I will tell you one thing, that while you were speaking about that, I was kind of envisioning through my life, I have met different people that I could actually envision them either outlining the points that they were going to make in their head. The outline is now secure, so I will now start speaking. Or you ask them a question and they do the T chart and the pros on the right and the cons on the left, and they sort it all down. Theorem says cons win. No, I don't think I'll go there.
Yeah.
We could actually see the mathematical brain, sorting out what the risk and reward is all the way down to the bottom. And then 15, 20 seconds later, the answer comes out. And I don't think that any of us, until we are schooled in the whole idea of decision-making processes and how to do it responsibly, and that the mother of all sentences after something doesn't work is, did anyone die? No one died? Okay. Shall we move on? Or do you need more time to grieve this really bad experience that you just had because of your own decision? No, I think we're done here.
I know. The thing I'd ask the teens was, how'd that work out for you?
Yeah.
Exactly. Or, I mean, I remember like thinking to myself, like if I had a decision to make, if I make this decision, like, is it going to kill me?
Right.
Like, I mean, and, okay, it's okay. So that same kind of train of thinking.
And it's whenever a model can be demonstrated to people, either in language or visually, like for instance, the whole hero's journey process, which is the circular process, which ends up after you've completed, taking the action, that you planned for, that proved a hypothesis at the beginning that may have been based on previous experience. And when you get back to that last period, you would then, look at what you've learned most recently, and now you take a time out. You rest and recover and get ready to go into the next round, with 100% vigor and 100% acuity, and as much self-efficacy as possible, all those other great multisyllabic words that we could come up with. The neat thing of all of that is once someone gets a pictorial process that they then can lean on, it's fun to watch people get stuck with that particular process until a new one can be introduced. And when they find a new one that kind of stands on and goes further than the previous experience, it's almost like, alchemy in life. We all want to make gold. And not many of us have the lead to start with, but, we all want to make gold.
I think the post part of when something happens is a very uncomfortable place for people to be. It's a very, that kind of, at the end, when you've kind of, like, the whole thing has culminated and you've kind of come to the end, and before something else starts, I find people are feel very, I don't know if it's vulnerable is a good word, or just like there's an element of the unknown, and where am I going from here, that they haven't maybe figured out. And I think that place is sometimes quite uncomfortable for people, I find.
Can you keep talking? Because this is a really interesting dynamic. I don't have a lot of recent experience with this, but you're now bringing things up from the past when I used to work in large organizations.
And I feel so bad because I have to go in a few minutes, but I have another meeting. But no, I'm just thinking about when I came off certain circumstances myself, where I really had an objective and I had a focus and I completed that. And then all of a sudden I had been so focused on what I was doing and that whole process, and it had a beginning, a middle, and an end, that till the next thing started, I kind of felt like, okay, well, what am I supposed to do now? Like, what am I supposed to, like, oh my gosh, like, it's almost like when I can think of a practical experience. It's almost like when you're planning a really big event.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden that event is over. And you're like, oh my gosh, like there's all this space, which I have to fill, like this time space, which I have to feel like, or people feel like they have to fill. And that's where that pause, where you said, like the pause where people kind of go, okay, well, let me kind of evaluate in the hero's journey. Let me evaluate and let me see, what did I learn? And I think that space people don't take enough time for.
Yeah. Part of that recovery period is listening for what's next. That's a very powerful part of it. And in many cases, there's a thrownness to immediately either want to put something there yourself or sign up for somebody else's future that they're projecting on you, you know? That was always one of my favorite things. If you don't put things in your calendar, somebody else is going to put their calendar into you, you know? So